Hi, my name is Grace Mitchell, and for years, I was the only child who stayed, the one who held my mother's hand through chemo, who helped my father relearn how to speak after his stroke, who watched both of them fade while my sister sent flowers and press releases from another city. When they passed, I thought love would matter more than appearances. But at the will reading, everything shattered. My sister inherited their multi-million-dollar company. Me? I got the old farmhouse with the leaking roof. She laughed, looked right at me, and said, "You should have taken better care of them." Then the lawyer cleared his throat and said, "Actually." And what came next wiped the smile off her face forever. Have you ever given your all to family, only to realize love wasn't enough? Where are you watching this story from today? I was born in Willamette Valley, Oregon, where the barley fields stretch all the way to the foothills and every morning is covered in a thin veil of fog. My father, Robert Mitchell, was a man who carried the scent of earth and sunlight, a man whose life revolved around seeds. He built Mitchell Agricultural, a family business that supplied organic seeds across the Northwest. My mother, Elaine, was the soul of it all. She kept meticulous records of every season, every variety of crop, every subtle change in the weather. She believed that farming was humanity's prayer to the earth, and that the earth would answer if we learned how to listen. As a child, I often sat beside her in the small lab behind our house, watching as she planted each mustard seed into the soil trays, labeling them carefully with her slanted handwriting. Madison, my sister, would only stop by long enough to take a few photos before heading off to another party or preparing for a competition she'd made it to the finals of. Madison was radiant, smart, charismatic, and always knew how to make every eye turn her way. I was the opposite. I loved silence, loved sitting on the porch listening to the wind move through the fields, loved the feeling of dirt under my fingernails. In every family photo, Madison stood in the center, smiling brightly, while I held a bouquet off to the left corner, my smile a little awkward. But when I look back, I don't regret it. I only regret that, even back then, my parents had already begun to see us through two very different lenses. When Madison earned a full MBA scholarship, Oregon Business Weekly published an article titled, "The Future Female Leader of Mitchell Agricultural." The whole town talked about her, and my parents were so proud they framed the article and hung it in the living room. When I graduated with a degree in agricultural bioengineering from Oregon State University, my father said only one sentence: "Good. Now you can help me at the seed farm." I still remember his smile that day. It wasn't dismissive, just a kind of casual satisfaction, as if my future had already been neatly decided. During dinner that night, he spoke enthusiastically about expanding the company, about Madison managing the finance division, and about me taking care of the seed fields. When I asked, "What if I also want to study management, Dad?" he replied gently, "Grace, you don't need to worry about that. You were born to grow things, not to run them." That sentence etched itself into my heart, a quiet boundary I was never meant to cross. Even so, I loved my work. I collaborated with local engineers, experimented with new seed varieties, and improved irrigation systems. I once believed that if I worked hard enough, my father would finally see my true worth. But every word of praise was reserved for Madison. When she founded an agritech startup in Seattle, my parents drove 5 hours just to attend her launch event, while I stayed behind to oversee the harvest season. That evening, my mother called, her voice filled with pride. Madison spoke on stage like a true CEO. The whole hall erupted in applause. I just smiled and said, "I'm happy for her." Then I went back outside, planting wooden stakes to mark the new crop rows under the yellow light spilling from the farmhouse, the last thread, I believed, still tying me to my family. Sometimes Madison came home to visit, and every time she did, the kitchen seemed to shrink beneath the weight of her stories about her success, her investors, her elegant dinners with partners. My father would listen intently, nodding in approval, while I brewed tea and washed the dishes, silently listening to their laughter echo through the walls. Once, as she was getting into her car, I overheard my father say, "You're the pride of my life." I didn't feel angry, just quiet, as if something inside me went still, like a winter field, empty, cold, and forgotten. My mother was the only one who tried to keep me close in that widening distance. Whenever my father and Madison discussed business, she would lean in and whisper to me, "Don't be sad, Grace. Every plant has its own time to bloom." I held on to that sentence for years. Maybe that's why, when she fell ill, I didn't hesitate to quit my job at the lab and return home to care for her. Madison was still in California then, signing her first $1 million contract. My father said, "You take care of your mother. Madison will handle the company." And so I did. I cared, I stayed silent, and I waited for the day they would finally see me not just as the one who plants the seeds, but as the one who kept the entire field alive when they no longer could. But they never said it. Not once. My mother was diagnosed with lung cancer in the winter of my 30th year. When the doctor delivered the news, my father sat frozen, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles turned white. My mother, however, simply smiled and asked softly, "How long has it been? When did it start?" Her voice didn't tremble. There was only a quiet acceptance, as if she had known all along. From that day on, the house in Willamette Valley fell silent. The laughter disappeared, replaced by the steady hum of the oxygen machine, the faint scent of antiseptic mixed with chamomile tea, and the soft evenings when I would read to her under the dim light. Madison was running the company's new branch in San Diego then. She called occasionally, her tone even and distant. "Don't worry, just take care of Mom. I'm working on a deal with a Japanese corporation. If it goes through, Mom and Dad will be so proud." She sent flowers, cards, even a check for $5,000 with a note that said, "Buy whatever Mom needs." But my mother didn't need money. She needed a real hand to hold, a real voice to hear, someone who would stay by her side. And that someone was me. I left my job at the research institute without a second thought. Every morning, I changed the oxygen tank, cooked oatmeal, and recorded every vital sign the doctor required. I learned how to give injections, how to bathe her without letting her feel pitied. On nights when her coughing fits left her voice raw, I sat behind her, rubbing her back while reading aloud the Bible verses she once taught me as a child. My father tried to stay strong, but some nights, I heard him crying softly in the kitchen, his voice breaking as he whispered, "It should have been me, not her." I never said a word. I just placed my hand on his shoulder. After that, he spoke less, spending hours on the porch staring into the fields as if searching for an answer in the soil that had once saved his life. Mother grew weaker, but she never stopped writing. Whenever she was lucid, she would call me over and say, "Grace, write this down for me. Light rain today, humidity 76%, the young barley sprouts look greener than yesterday." I smiled through the sting in my eyes. One late February afternoon, just after sunset, she gripped my hand tightly, her frail fingers trembling. "Grace," she whispered, "you have always been the best part of us." The words were light as breath, yet they carved themselves deep into my heart forever. I didn't cry, then I only nodded, afraid that if I spoke, she would hear how terrified I was of losing her. My mother passed away at dawn, while dew still clung to the edge of the porch roof. My father sat by her bedside, holding her hand until it grew cold. Madison didn't make it back in time. Her flight was delayed, and all she sent was a message. "Make sure Mom looks beautiful, Grace. Don't let the press get any bad photos." My hands trembled as I read it. In those final moments, all I wanted was for her to be there so our mother could hear both her daughters' voices one last time. But she wasn't. The hospital room held only the fading sound of the heart monitor and my father's hoarse whisper as he recited his final prayer. The funeral took place a week later. The small church in downtown Corvallis was filled mostly farmers and former employees of the company. Madison arrived just as the ceremony began, half an hour late. She stepped out of a sleek SUV, dressed in a spotless white dress, oversized black sunglasses covering her eyes, walking straight toward the local photographer's camera. When the coffin was brought in, she burst into tears, perfectly timed, perfectly posed, the kind of grief that photographs well. My father saw her and let out a long sigh. He said nothing, just took my hand, and for the first time in my life, he let me guide him inside as if he was too tired to be anyone's pillar anymore. After the funeral, my father's health declined rapidly. The stroke came one March morning while he was trying to lift a sack of seeds into the yard. I found him collapsed on the ground, his eyes still open, staring toward the apple orchard. He survived, but he was never the same. Half his body was paralyzed, his speech slurred. From that day on, I became everything at once: nurse, daughter, and sometimes the only friend he had left. I helped him through physical therapy, fed him porridge, read him the morning paper, and sat beside him on the porch at sunset. Some nights, he would take my hand and say softly, "You're so much like your mother, Grace." Calm, patient, and always listening. I would just smile, never daring to tell him that sometimes I felt small and lost like a tree forgotten in the forest. Madison called a few times, each conversation ending with the same familiar line. "Keep Dad comfortable, okay? I'll come home once the project's done." But one project led to another, and my father passed away before she ever made it back. I sat beside him until the very end. He gripped my wrist, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, his breath shallow. "Don't be angry with your sister, Grace." I held his hand until it grew cold. The house was silent, the only sound the steady ticking of the grandfather clock, marking each second like a soft farewell. Madison arrived on the day of the funeral late, just like last time. Her plane landed at noon, and she called while I was standing in the backyard. "Are you ready? A photographer from AgriWorld wants to cover the memorial. They're doing a feature on Dad's legacy." I paused for a few seconds before answering. "Everything's ready. But I don't think we'll need cameras this time." My father's funeral took place on a rainy Sunday morning at the First Baptist Church of Corvallis, the same church my mother used to take me to as a child. The red brick building stood still in the mist, the church bells echoing like a distant heartbeat. More people came than I expected, not only neighbors but also my father's business partners, local politicians, and familiar faces from Mitchell Agricultural's company events. Everyone spoke kindly of him, that he was a pioneer, an inspiration, a symbol of Oregon agriculture. I sat quietly in the last pew, clutching my mother's handkerchief, eyes fixed on the old wooden floor where raindrops from people's coats had gathered into faint trails. No one said my name. No one asked if I was okay. When the pastor finished his prayer, he invited a family representative to speak. Madison stepped forward tall, composed, graceful in a simple yet elegant black dress, her heels clicking rhythmically on the wood floor, drawing every gaze toward her. Her voice carried clearly through the church, each word perfectly rehearsed. My father once told me, to farm is to understand that even the smallest seed can grow into the tallest tree if it has the right leader. That's what he taught me: to lead, to be brave, to look beyond the present. My mother taught me compassion, resilience, and the ability to truly listen. Together, they shaped who I am today, and I will continue their legacy. Applause filled the church. I heard chairs shifting, soft sniffles, and quiet murmurs of admiration. "She's just like Robert. She has her father's spirit." The living image of him. No one seemed to notice that during her entire speech, my name was never mentioned. Not once. I was just a shadow at the back of the room, the daughter who had changed the oxygen tanks, fed them porridge, driven them to every appointment, yet somehow erased from the perfect family portrait being repainted for the public. When Madison ended her eulogy with a promise to continue expanding the company nationwide, the audience stood and applauded once more. I looked at my father lying in his polished walnut casket and wondered if he were alive, would he be clapping too? After the ceremony, relatives and guests gathered in the church hall for coffee and cookies. Madison was busy shaking hands, smiling, posing for photos, exchanging business cards with people from the industry. Every time someone said, "Robert would be so proud," she replied, "I'm just trying to carry on his legacy." I stood quietly in a corner, holding a paper cup of water, listening as each word sliced through old memories like tiny blades. Then my uncle, my mother's older brother, walked over. He was a gentleman, soft-spoken, the one who'd taught me how to plant lavender when I was little. He looked at me for a while before saying softly, "Grace, you're a good daughter. Everyone sees that, but you're not the heir." The words weren't cruel, they carried no malice, but they pierced straight through the composure I'd fought to maintain all morning. I just nodded and murmured, "I know." When most people had gone, I returned to the main hall. Light from the stained glass windows spilled over the casket, casting red and blue reflections across the tile floor. I stepped closer and laid down a bouquet of wild daisies, my father's favorite. They weren't fancy, just the kind that grew along the fence where he used to walk. I whispered, just loud enough for myself to hear, "I was never good at speaking in public, you know that. But I'm here. And I'll stay here, even when everyone else forgets." When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The street was wet, mirroring the pale gray sky above. Madison stood nearby talking to a reporter from Agri World, the same one who had just snapped a photo of her wiping her tears. As I walked past, she turned toward me, a polite smile on her lips. "You okay, Grace?" Her voice was soft but carried that unmistakable tone, the kind that doesn't expect an answer. I replied, "I'm fine, thank you for coming." She nodded, turned away, and smiled again, this time at a businessman approaching her with a handshake. I drove home in silence. The road from the church to the farm was only 20 minutes long, yet that day it felt like crossing an entire lifetime. The rain had washed the dust from the wooden fences, leaving behind the earthy scent my father used to call the smell of beginnings. I stopped the car in front of the porch and looked at the old house darkened by the afternoon light, my parents' photograph still hanging by the window. Everything was still there except them. I walked inside, hung up my coat, and made a cup of chamomile tea. Steam rose, blurring my reflection on the glass, the face of someone who was never called an heir, yet was the only one who stayed until the very end. Inside me, a small flame burned quietly, not one of anger, but of clarity. I understood then that the world might never see me the way it saw Madison. But in that still kitchen, I made myself a promise. If my father's true legacy was the land, I would not let it die in someone else's hands. I didn't need a podium or applause to prove my worth. I would do what my father had taught me all his life: to care, to stay silent, to endure, so that one day, when these fields bloomed again, people would know that a daughter named Grace had kept that legacy alive. 3 weeks after the funeral, I received a call from the offices of Lawson and Beckett, the law firm that had handled my parents' financial matters for over 20 years. "Mr. Lawson's deep, deliberate voice came through the phone. "Miss Grace, your parents appointed me as executor of their estate. We'll need to meet in person to read and sign the inheritance documents." I nodded, thanked him, and hung up. At that moment, I didn't think much, only felt a hollow quiet inside. Property, money, the company, none of it had ever truly mattered to me. I just wanted to settle everything, close that chapter of my life, and finally let it rest. The will reading was scheduled for Monday morning. Oregon was gray and heavy with fog, mist hanging low over the trees lining Jefferson Avenue. I arrived 10 minutes early, sitting for a moment in the old Subaru my father had given me when I graduated college, taking a few deep breaths before walking into the red brick building of the law firm. On the second floor, the main conference room held a long walnut table, and 2 steaming cups of coffee had already been set out. Madison was there, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, her polished heels gleaming under the ceiling lights. She smiled when she saw me. "You made it. I thought you'd be late, like always." I answered with a faint smile and took the seat across from her. Mr. Lawson entered, holding a thick folder of documents. He was a composed man in his late 50s, with graying hair, silver-rimmed glasses, and an expression that revealed nothing. Setting the folder down, he opened it to the first page, his voice calm and steady. "According to the last will and testament of Mr. and Mrs. Robert and Elaine Mitchell, the estate shall be distributed as follows." The sound of pages turning echoed in the quiet room, and my heartbeat slowed to match it. To my eldest daughter, Madison Mitchell, I leave the full ownership of Mitchell Agricultural Corporation, including all assets, accounts, vehicles, and operational rights. Madison smiled the same victorious smile I'd seen all my life. She even brushed a strand of hair back, as if posing for a camera. And, Mr. Lawson paused. To my youngest daughter, Grace Mitchell, I leave the family farmhouse located at 122 Oak Ridge Road, Willamette Valley. Silence filled the room. I could hear the wall clock ticking louder than before, like my own pulse. Madison turned to me, her lips curling into a smirk. "That's it?" she said with a short laugh. "You spent years cleaning up their mess, and all you got was the mess itself." She shook her head and scoffed. "Guess that's what happens when you don't dream big, sis." I said nothing. My eyes rested on the page where my name was typed in cold, impersonal letters attached to an old, weathered house, the last fragment of a life already gone. I signed the line for the beneficiary, my hand trembling slightly as the pen touched the paper. Not from anger, but from the feeling that I was drawing the final line beneath years of love, care, and sacrifice that no one had ever truly seen. Madison leaned across the table, gathering her stack of papers, her tone dripping with triumph. "Well, looks like we both got what we deserve. I got the company, you got your dirt." I smiled faintly. "Maybe so." The reply made her pause for a moment, but then she just shrugged. Mr. Lawson closed the folder carefully, aligning the papers with deliberate precision. As the last signatures were nearly done, he glanced at me. There was something different in his eyes, something cautious, almost as if he were holding back a truth he wasn't yet allowed to share. His voice dropped low, meant only for me. "Are you sure you want to sign today, Miss Grace? You don't want to review the document more closely?" I shook my head. "No need, Mr. Lawson. I'm a simple person. Whatever my parents wanted, I'll accept it as it is." He studied me a moment longer than expected, then said quietly, "I understand. But, sometimes, what looks like the least, holds the most." I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was just being kind. As we left the office, Madison stopped halfway down the stairs and turned toward me. "Grace, don't take this personally, okay? Mom and Dad just knew who could handle responsibility." Then she smiled, her eyes gleaming with the light I once mistook for pride, but now saw clearly as arrogance. "Take care of that old place. Maybe one day, when I expand the company, I'll buy it back from you." I said nothing, just watched her walk out the door. A gust of wind swept through, lifting the fallen yellow leaves outside, spinning them around her high heels like nature's quiet sarcasm. I stood there for a long while. The hallway lights cast a soft glow against the glass, reflecting my face pale but calm. Behind me, Mr. Lawson was still in the room, gathering the remaining papers. When I turned to thank him, he spoke slowly, his voice steady but weighted. "That house. Take good care of it, Grace. It's more than just land." I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to make of his words, then nodded gently and walked away. Stepping out of the building, the cold air cleared my head. The Oregon sky was thick and gray, a fine mist of rain beginning to fall. I opened the car door and sat for a moment, staring at the inheritance document in my hands. In bold letters at the top, it read, 122 Oak Ridge Road, Mitchell Farmhouse. I pressed my lips together. To anyone else, it might have been a modest, unremarkable property. But to me, it was everything: the place where my mother laughed, where my father taught me how to plant, where I once believed that love could survive even without recognition. And though I couldn't quite explain the strange look in Mr. Lawson's eyes, I felt deep down that within this old farmhouse, my parents had left me something far greater. Something Madison, with all her brilliance and ambition, would never understand. I returned to the farmhouse at 122 Oak Ridge Road on a misty afternoon. The dirt road leading up to the house was muddy, the tires sinking deep and leaving uneven tracks behind. The iron gate still leaned to one side, the old Mitchell Farm sign so rusted it was barely legible. The wind carried the scent of hay and damp soil, and faintly within it, the sweetness of fallen apples, the scent I hadn't smelled in years but which instantly tightened my chest. My mother used to say that apple trees were the most faithful of all plants because no matter how long people were gone, they bloomed again each season, as if waiting to be noticed. I parked by the porch and stood there for a few minutes, listening to the soft tapping of rain on the corrugated roof. The front door creaked as I pushed it open. The smell of dust, damp wood, and time hit me so strongly that I had to stop and breathe before moving further inside. Everything was still in its place, exactly as I'd left it. My father's walnut rocking chair sat by the window, his old sweater still draped over the armrest. The family photo hung crooked on the wall, the wooden frame cracked at the corner, and the Remington typewriter my father had used to draft contracts was now covered in a fine layer of dust. I ran my fingers over its keys, cold metal, a few sticking from rust. On the desk, a ceramic coffee cup sat untouched, the rim stained brown where the liquid had long since dried. The whole room felt as though time itself had sealed it in amber, frozen on the day before everything changed. I began to clean. Dusting the shelves, gathering old papers, folding a few faded letters, each small act stirred memories from every corner of the house. My father calling for a hammer, my mother humming softly as she watered the apple trees. When I pulled open the second drawer to organize the files, a faint metallic clink broke the stillness. I froze, my heartbeat quickening. Looking down, I saw something small roll across the dusty floor toward my foot, a tiny brass key, dulled with age but still glinting faintly. I bent down to pick it up. Etched along the side were the words, Deposit Box 143, Cascade Bank. Turning it over, I noticed 3 engraved initials REM, carved unevenly by hand, Robert and Elaine Mitchell. I looked around the desk, my mind racing with a strange mix of excitement and dread, as if I were standing before a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. I kept pulling the remaining drawers, searching for another clue. In the bottom one, buried beneath old folders and worn envelopes, I found a thick packet sealed in nylon, its surface marked with my father's familiar slanted handwriting. For Grace, when she's ready to understand. I sat down in his old rocking chair, my hands trembling as I held the envelope. The ink had faded, but the letters were clear just like the ones he used to write in his old crop manuals. Carefully, I unsealed it. Inside were a folded letter, several stock certificates, and a copy of a document titled Mitchell Agricultural Trust, Confidential. But first, I began to read the letter. Grace, if you're reading this, it means your mother and I are gone. I'm sorry for the weight you've carried, more than your share. I know it hurt you to see the company go elsewhere, but there are things you don't yet understand. We didn't leave you the farmhouse because it's old, we left it because it's where everything began, and where I need you to return to find what's missing. The handwriting slanted gently, steady but trembling at the ends, a trace of the illness that had weakened his hand. My heart pounded as I continued reading. I once believed, blindly, that a legacy meant wealth. But your mother helped me see that a true legacy lies in the values we protect and preserve. Mitchell Agricultural is not a company, it is the result of love, of the land, of the people who built it with us. I need someone who understands that to lead it, not someone who only knows how to sign contracts. That's why I prepared something that only you can find. The key in your hand, Deposit Box 143 at Cascade Bank, contains everything I want you to know, the real reason behind the will, and the part of the inheritance I've left for you. Something far greater than any sum that can be measured in money. I stopped reading, my throat tightening. Every word felt like hearing his voice again, low, rough, but unwavering. Near the end, the handwriting weakened, the strokes fading into tremors. If you feel angry, I understand. You've long proven that you know how to care, how to protect. Now, take care of this legacy the way you cared for us. When you open that box, you'll understand that I never forgot you. With love, Dad. I set the letter down, tears falling before I even noticed. Outside, the rain kept drizzling softly against the roof. In that dusty room, I could almost see them again, father at the desk, mother pouring tea, both smiling gently at me. I opened the accompanying folder. Inside was a copy of official bank documents, stamped in red. Cascade Bank. Safety Deposit Box 143. Registered to REM. At the bottom lay a small handwritten note, "Ask for Mrs. Chen. She'll know." I folded everything carefully and slipped it into my bag, then looked around the room one last time. The old walls still held the agricultural map of Oregon my father used to study, and the corner of the desk still bore the small cut I'd made as a child while learning to use a knife. For the first time in years, I felt a quiet peace settle inside me. The feeling of abandonment was gone, replaced by a deep gratitude. Because in the end, my parents had spoken to me in their own way through a key, a letter, and a trust I never knew I'd earned. I closed the office door, holding the key in my palm. Under the soft yellow light streaming through the window, the engraved letters shimmered faintly. Deposit Box 143. I whispered to myself, "All right, Dad, I'm ready to understand." Then I switched off the light and stepped onto the porch. The rain had stopped, leaving only a thin mist. Beneath the apple tree, a few fallen fruits lay scattered, the rising moon casting a silvery glow across their skins. I bent down, picked one up, wiped off the mud, and took a small bite. It was unexpectedly sweet, the taste of soil, of seasons, and perhaps of a new beginning waiting behind the doors of a bank called Cascade. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The Oregon sky was still veiled in fog, the early light stretching thin like silk across the fields. I washed my face, put on my mother's old wool coat, and slipped the small key carefully into the inner pocket. On my way to Cascade Bank, I stopped at a roadside cafe and bought 2 cups of coffee, a quiet ritual my father and I used to share whenever we made delivery trips together. The faint aroma of black coffee brought back those long drives down the highway, the seed crates rattling in the back, and my father's calm, thoughtful voice. "You know, Grace, everyone wants to sow plenty, but only the one who truly understands the soil knows which seeds are worth keeping." Today, I finally understood what he meant. Cascade Bank stood in the center of Corvallis, an old white stone building with tall columns and an arched dome. When I stepped inside, the receptionist looked up with a polite smile. "Good morning, how can I help you?" I took a deep breath and said clearly, "I'm here to access Safety Deposit Box, number 143. It's registered under Robert and Elaine Mitchell." She looked momentarily surprised, then nodded and gestured for me to wait in a private room. A few minutes later, a middle-aged woman entered, steady posture, serious expression, but kind eyes. "You must be Grace?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm Mrs. Chen. Your father told me that if you ever came here one day, everything would be ready." We passed through 2 layers of security doors and descended into the bank's basement. The air was cold, filled with the metallic scent of steel and silence. "Mrs. Chen" stopped before a long row of safe deposit boxes, row 4, box 3. She pulled out a ring of keys and said softly, "He left this part for you. I can only unlock the outer seal." When the lock clicked open, she stepped back and gestured toward me. I took my key, slid it into the second slot, and turned it gently. My hand trembled as the mechanism released with a low metallic sound. The door swung open. Inside, the light reflected off polished steel, illuminating a small oak box tied with a navy blue ribbon, my mother's favorite color. I carried the box to the inspection table and untied the ribbon. Inside were several file folders, a sealed envelope, and a handwritten letter, the ink revealing 2 distinct hands, my father's firm, slanted script intertwined with the softer strokes of my mother. "Dearest Grace, we know you're hurting, perhaps even feeling betrayed because the will wasn't what you expected. But what you saw was only one part of a much larger picture. We lived in a time when trust was too easily traded for profit. There were things we feared might burden you if you knew them too soon. Yet, we also knew that when the world began to change, only someone who understood the worth of people would know how to protect what truly mattered." The handwriting shifted, my mother's graceful letters flowed into the next lines. "Madison has talent, confidence, and ambition, but she lacks patience. She doesn't understand that leadership isn't about commanding, it's about carrying. She's skilled at presenting, at building an image, but she lacks discipline and faith. You, Grace, you never needed to say much. You do, you listen, you heal. You carry the heart of who we are, and that's what this company will need most when the world changes. That's why we've decided to transfer all controlling shares of Mitchell Agricultural into a trust. I looked up, my heart pounding. The words, controlling shares, made my breath catch. I kept reading, almost holding it in. The trust is named the Mitchell Legacy Trust. It was established 3 months before your father passed. The sole appointed trustee and operator is you. However, to avoid conflict and envy, your control will only activate if the current holder Madison violates any of the ethical conduct clauses written in the company charter. She will not know this exists. We deliberately structured the trust to operate quietly, under the guise of a humanitarian subsidiary. Your mother and I believe that sooner or later, a person's choices reveal who they truly are. I paused. The letter slipped from my hands onto the table, my palm covering my mouth as the air caught in my throat. In that instant, all the years of hurt, doubt, and quiet resentment seemed to dissolve into something else, not joy, but recognition. I had been seen. My parents had trusted me more than I ever realized. I turned to the next section, my father's handwriting taking over again. My daughter, don't think of this as revenge. I don't want you to fight your sister. The company is not a battlefield, it's a place where people and the earth coexist. If Madison learns the lesson, extend your hand to her. If she doesn't, protect this legacy not with power, but with character. Inside this vault are all the legal papers, stock certificates, and the registry for the trust. And if, one day, you ever doubt your own worth, remember this: true power is never taken. It finds those who simply do what's right. I read the final line again and again, each word sinking deeper into me. Grace, you don't have to seize power, just do what's right and it will come to you. As I folded the letter, tears fell onto the paper, softening the ink until it bled slightly into the fibers. Across from me, Mrs. Chen sat silently, watching. After a long pause, she said quietly, "Your parents were wise people. But more than that, they understood people. Your father came here once, not long before he passed. When he left this file, he told me, if my daughter ever comes here, it means she's ready." I smiled through my tears. He always knew everything before anyone else did. Mrs. Chen nodded and helped me review the documents carefully. Inside the box were copies of the Mitchell Legacy Trust Agreement, along with stock certificates showing that 60% of the company's total value had been registered in my name as the custodial holder. There were also files detailing a reserve account established to protect workers and sustain the Employee Welfare Fund in case of a corporate crisis. Everything was meticulously organized, even a USB drive containing encrypted financial data and complete balance sheets. When I stepped out of the bank, the rain had stopped. I walked onto the quiet street, the oak box cradled in my hands, my chest heavy yet luminous with clarity. Looking up at the pale Oregon sky, I whispered as if speaking to the wind, "I understand now, Mom and Dad. This isn't loss, this is the lesson." Driving back to the farmhouse, the wooden box rested quietly on the passenger seat. The road home no longer felt as long as before. The trees lining the roadside swayed gently, a small stream rippled alongside the dirt path, and for the first time, I felt as though my parents were there somewhere close, watching over me. I was no longer the daughter left behind with an old farmhouse. I was the keeper of the true heart of the Mitchell legacy, and soon enough, the world would know, not through any grand announcement, but through how I would protect it, every day, in silence and with the integrity they had taught me. After leaving the bank that day, I didn't tell anyone what was inside the box. Not friends, not relatives, and certainly not Madison. I simply returned to the farm, placed the oak box inside the old cabinet where my father once kept his notebooks, and carried on with life quietly, just as he would have wanted. But silence doesn't mean blindness. I began monitoring every piece of news about Mitchell Agricultural. The more I read, the more a cold unease crept through me. Within just 2 months of my father's passing, Madison had completely restructured the company. She fired 3 veteran managers, the very people who had helped my father build the company from the ground up, claiming they were not aligned with the company's modern direction. In their place, Madison hired a group of young consultants from California, known for their growth at all costs philosophy. The organic seed lines that had once defined Mitchell Agricultural's reputation were gradually replaced with cheap, genetically modified imports from overseas. I read the reports in disbelief. My mother used to say, "The soil of Willamette never betrays anyone unless people betray it first." Madison was doing exactly that. By the 3rd month, an article appeared in the Oregon Business Review. Mitchell Agricultural under new leadership, bold innovation or reckless gamble. Madison's face filled the front page, smiling brightly under the new slogan, "Feeding the Future." But beneath the glowing headline, a few local farmers had already begun to speak out. One commented that they were pressured into contracts with unfairly low prices in exchange for the company's use of chemical fertilizers to boost yield. I saved everything: the article, the comments, the images. Not because I wanted to attack my sister, but because my father had once told me, "If you want to protect what's right, you must first learn what wrong looks like." By the 4th month, the scandal erupted. A televised investigation revealed that Mitchell Agricultural had secretly altered its production process, using cheap industrial chemicals that contaminated the water supply of a small town 40 miles from Corvallis. The footage showed fields turning yellow, dead fish floating in the river. Madison appeared on camera, her voice calm and rehearsed, saying, "It was merely a minor supply chain incident." I watched, my hands trembling as they clenched into fists. "A minor incident?" I whispered. My parents had spent their entire lives building the company's name on integrity, and within 6 months, all of it was washed away in a few cold, calculated words. I began to investigate further. Under the guise of agricultural soil research, I contacted several farmers who had previously partnered with Mitchell Agricultural. They complained about being forced into new contracts, delayed payments, even threats of losing their supply rights. I never told them who I was. I simply listened, took notes, saved their emails and invoices, and carefully stored everything in an encrypted folder labeled Oak Ridge. There was no satisfaction in any of it, only a deep, quiet sorrow. Because I knew, sooner or later, what my parents had foreseen was about to happen. 6 months later, on a chilly October morning, I was in the apple orchard when my phone rang. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Mr. Lawson. His voice was low and deliberate. "Miss Grace, I need to see you today. It's regarding the Mitchell Trust." My heart began to race, my hands damp with sweat. "What's happened, Mr. Lawson?" I asked. He exhaled a short, heavy sigh before speaking slowly. "Madison has committed a serious ethical violation. The board has confirmed it. According to the trust agreement, control of the company will automatically transfer to you. I'll send the documents within the hour." I froze in the middle of the orchard. The wind hissed through the branches above, a few apples dropping to the ground with dry, hollow thuds. I couldn't form a single word. 6 months ago, I had walked out of that law office with nothing but an old farmhouse and a heavy heart. And now, overnight, I was being handed full control of the company I had never once dreamed of leading. I sank down onto the wooden bench beneath the tree and called Mr. Lawson back. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "I've reviewed the clause myself," he said. "The internal report confirms that Madison signed a contract approving the use of compound N42, a chemical banned by the state environmental agency. A major newspaper is preparing to publish an investigation. The advisory board has already issued a formal notice. All executive rights and controlling shares will transfer to the Mitchell Legacy Trust, and you are the sole legal authority." I ended the call and stared down at my palm, the same hand that had once held the small brass key. Now I finally understood why my father had engraved Deposit Box 143 with such care. He knew this day would come. He knew Madison's ambition would one day cross the line, that her hunger for recognition would fracture what he had built. But he also believed that when that day arrived, I wouldn't seek revenge, I would protect. And that, more than anything, was what terrified me. Could I truly carry what my parents had entrusted me with? Could I protect a legacy built not on power, but on principle? That afternoon, an email arrived from the law firm. The subject line was brief. Transfer of executive authority, effective immediately. Below it was the official document, stamped and digitally signed by the company board. I read each line slowly, every word weighing heavy in my chest. All executive rights, shares, and controlling interests in Mitchell Agricultural Corporation shall be transferred to Miss Grace Mitchell, trustee of the Mitchell Legacy Trust. I sat motionless for a long time. Outside the window, the daylight faded to gray, and the only sound left was the clock ticking steadily in the old farmhouse. Madison called that evening, her voice hoarse and frantic. "Grace, what is this? Lawson just told me the board transferred control to you. Please tell them it's a mistake." I didn't answer right away. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm but heavy. "It's not a mistake, Madison. I tried to warn you, you just never listened." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds before she let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Unbelievable. So you just sat there waiting for me to fall apart? You must be so proud of yourself." I took a deep breath. "No, I'm not proud, I'm sad. Dad believed you could lead. But you betrayed what he valued most, integrity." Her breathing grew fast, jagged, and then came the abrupt sound of the line disconnecting. I set the phone down and stared out into the dark porch. The wind swept through the apple orchard, carrying the damp scent of earth after rain. My father once said, "Sometimes you don't need to cut down the bad tree, just water the good one. Its shade will take care of the rest." I understood now it was time to do exactly that, to protect what was worth saving and let the rest fall away with the seasons. That night, I opened the window and looked up at the pale sky, my heart swelling with something between loss and peace. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel fear. There was only one clear, undeniable truth: my parents had been right. Justice doesn't need to be declared, it only needs time and truth. Madison showed up on a late October afternoon when the sunset spread across the orchard like a sheet of golden silk. I was in the yard, sleeves rolled up, watering the winter vegetable beds my father had once planted. The sound of tires skidding broke the calm. I looked up to see her silver Mercedes pulling up hard in front of the gate. The door swung open so fast that the wind stirred up dust from the ground. Madison stepped out, her high heels sinking into the damp soil, her face carefully made up but pale, her eyes red and swollen like someone who hadn't slept in days. Before I could speak, she stormed toward me, her voice trembling, raw, and full of rage. "Are you happy now, Grace? You've taken everything from me. I gave my whole life to them, to this company, and you just sat here, playing with dirt and trees. Now you have it all. Does it feel good? Does it feel like victory?" I set the watering can down, wiped my hands on the coarse cloth hanging by the fence, and turned to face her. The last light of the day streamed through the porch roof, falling across Madison's face, revealing the fine lines I had never noticed before. I didn't answer right away. I let the wind pass between us, the same wind that carried the scent of apples, of soil, and of all the memories that once bound two sisters together under the same roof. Finally, I spoke, softly but clearly. "You're wrong. I didn't take anything, I only kept what Mom and Dad entrusted to me. You can call that justice or consequence, that's up to you." Madison let out a sharp, bitter laugh, but there was something fragile underneath it, something close to breaking. "Justice? You call this justice?" "I worked nonstop, Grace. I put Mitchell Agricultural back on the map. I made people respect the Mitchell name again. I did it all for them, for this family." Her voice rose, each word cutting through the air like a blade. "And you? You've spent your life hiding behind Mom and Dad, doing small things, meaningless things, and now you stand there pretending to be righteous. You have no idea what leadership costs." I took a long breath, steadying my voice. "You're right, I don't know the cost of your kind of leadership. I only know the cost of sleepless nights beside a hospital bed, of changing oxygen tanks at midnight, of watching our father collapse in silence with no one around. I know the cost of cracked hands washing dishes while you posed for reporters, and if that means I don't understand responsibility, then so be it. Madison froze, speechless for a moment. Her eyes flickered, uncertain, before hardening again into anger. You've always thought you were better than everyone else, haven't you? That fake kindness of yours so sanctimonious, so pathetic. I did everything they asked for, and they still chose you. They still trusted you more than me. I looked at her for a long time, my anger gone, only pity remained. It's not that they trusted me more, I said quietly. They just knew you hadn't learned the lesson they were trying to teach. You're great at presenting, at impressing people, but you've never learned to listen. When our parents needed you, you weren't there. When others warned you, you didn't hear them. You only showed up when there were cameras, Madison. And I was there when they couldn't feed themselves. That's the difference. Madison stepped back, her eyes glistening. If they trusted you that much, she whispered, voice trembling. Then why didn't they tell me? Why didn't they let me know? Why hide it? Why lie to me like that? I took a slow step closer, close enough to see her eyes clearly, the same confident eyes that once dazzled everyone, now filled with fear and shame. Because they didn't want to punish you, I said softly. They wanted to teach us both. One of us had to learn how to love, the other had to learn how to lose. And both lessons are equally hard. Madison stood still. The first tear slipped down her cheek, followed by another and another. She turned away, her voice breaking. You talk like it's easy. But you don't know what it's like to lose everything. I do, I said quietly. I lost them. Twice. The words stopped her. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The wind swept through the orchard, sending a flurry of yellow apple leaves spiraling around us. Madison turned away, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, her shoulders trembling. So what do you want now, Grace? You want me to kneel down and apologize? I shook my head. No. I just want you to leave and find yourself again. Mitchell Agricultural doesn't need more hate, it needs healing just like we do. Madison stared at me for a long moment. Then a faint, broken smile crossed her face, part bitter, part defeated. Healing, she said, almost laughing through the tears. You always talk like some moral saint. But maybe Mom and Dad were right. You were born to grow things. And me, I was only ever good at cutting them down. She turned away and walked toward her car, her high heels slipping on the wet ground, nearly sending her to her knees. I instinctively took a step forward to help, but she waved me off sharply. Don't pity me, she muttered. Then she got into the car and slammed the door so hard that the sound echoed across the yard. The car pulled away, its tires churning up the damp soil, leaving 2 long tracks stretching all the way to the gate. I stood there, watching the red taillights fade behind the line of trees. No anger. No satisfaction. Just an empty stillness spreading through me, as if all the words left unspoken between us had been carried off by the wind. I turned back to the porch, sat on the wooden steps, and looked out at the rice fields glowing gold under the dying light. Each stalk bowed gently in the breeze, their golden heads swaying like a soft ocean. My father once said, the land never betrays those who are honest with it. Maybe he was right. People can betray each other. Money and reputation can vanish, but the land somehow always finds a way to forgive. I poured myself a cup of tea and inhaled the faint floral scent. A strange peace settled in my chest. I knew Madison would need time. Maybe she would hate me forever. Or maybe one day, when the harvest winds swept across Willamette again, she'd remember what our father used to say, everyone has their own season of harvest. As for me, I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. I just watched the sun dip behind the hills and understood that every storm arrives to wash away the old, making room for new seeds to grow. That winter, the snow came early. The first flakes settled on the old wooden fence, melting and freezing again into thin threads of ice. The entire Willamette Valley lay silent, fields stripped bare, the dim farmhouse windows glowing against the white. After my last encounter with Madison, I spent weeks in reflection not about victory, but about what my parents truly wanted me to do. And I realized this: if they had left me with power, it wasn't to punish. It was to make things right. I began restructuring Mitchell Agricultural almost immediately. On my first day stepping into the headquarters in Corvallis, every pair of eyes turned toward me, curious, doubtful, exhausted. Some whispered behind my back, "Who is she, that farm girl?" I didn't blame them. They'd seen too many sudden changes, too many broken promises. I stood in the grand lobby, staring at the slogan Madison had engraved on the wall, "Feeding the Future." And in my head, my father's voice echoed clearly, "If you want to change something, start by calling it by its right name." That afternoon, I had the slogan removed. A week later, a new one was installed in its place, simple yet resolute: "Grow with integrity." Hailun Len Kung Sir Ching Truck. People looked at me, surprised. I only smiled and said, "If we don't sow the right way, then nothing we harvest will ever be worth keeping." I called a meeting with the entire management team. There were no accusations, no dismissals, just one question: who still believes in what my parents once believed? For a few moments, the room was silent. Then, one by one, hands began to rise. In that moment, I knew the legacy was still alive. It had only been waiting for someone to rekindle it. The restructuring took time, but it was steady. I shut down all chemical-based projects, willingly accepting short-term losses to restore our organic seed line. I reached out to every farmer who'd been dropped from contracts, driving out to their fields, sitting at their wooden tables, drinking black coffee, and apologizing in person. Some looked at me coldly. "Robert's daughter, huh? Aren't you afraid of being cursed at?" they asked. I replied, "I didn't come here to be praised. I came to start over." Some said nothing, others nodded quietly. And slowly, they began to return. The old partnerships came back to life. The first shipments of organic seeds under the renewed Mitchell label began appearing in local markets. People started to say, "Mitchell is back, but this time, it's different." I also created a small scholarship fund in my parents' name, the Robert and Elaine Mitchell Foundation. The first award went to a young Mexican student studying agriculture at Oregon State University, the daughter of a former company worker from 30 years ago. When she accepted the scholarship, tears rolled down her cheeks as she said, "I want to learn how to grow crops without hurting the soil, just like Mr. Robert taught my father." I smiled, warmth blooming quietly inside me. Maybe that was the true reward of inheritance, not profit, but witnessing the values you protect come alive again in someone else. At the same time, I launched a new initiative called Roots of Grace, based right at my parents' old farmhouse. I didn't want to turn it into a polished office. I kept everything as it was: wooden walls, tin roof, and the apple orchard out back. We used it as a training center for agricultural students, teaching them about organic farming, about respecting the earth, about letting the harvest grow naturally instead of forcing it. On weekends, I invited older farmers, men and women who had once worked with my father, to share their stories. Their weathered hands pointed to the sky as they taught how to read the rain, or explained why pruning at noon was better than early morning. At the end of each class, I would stand by the doorway and look down at the muddy footprints scattered across the floorboards, each one pressed deep into the earth of our land. And I knew this was how my parents would have wanted the company to live on, marked not by numbers, but by footsteps. One morning, while the fog was still thick over the fields, I received a call from the Oregon Journal. They wanted to do an interview about the remarkable revival of Mitchell Agricultural. I agreed, but only on two conditions: no personal photos, and no mention of the family incident. When the article was published a few days later, there was one line that made me stop and read it again and again. New director Grace Mitchell doesn't talk much about business strategy. She talks about trust, about soil, and about never planting anything if all you can think about is the harvest. In the years that followed, the company slowly stabilized, then began to thrive, this time, sustainably. I built an open cooperative system with local farmers, sharing profits fairly according to contribution. Each harvest season, we hosted a festival at the Oak Ridge farm called Harvest with Heart. There were no gowns, no VIP guests, just country music, open-air dinners, and people telling stories about their crops. Once, an elderly farmer took my hand, his voice raspy with emotion. "Your father once promised to make Mitchell a company for the people, not for the shareholders," he said. "Today, you've made that happen." All I could answer was, "Not me. Us." The following spring, I had a small sign installed at the farm's front gate. It read, "Roots of Grace, where integrity grows." Beneath the sign, I planted a row of lavender, my mother's favorite flower. When the wind blew, the lavender's fragrance drifted across the yard, mingling with the scent of apples, wood, and memory. I often sat on the porch, watching young students arrive for training, hearing their laughter, and feeling finally that this place had healed. I never heard from Madison again, except through passing mentions that she had moved to Portland and was consulting for a startup. Some said she had changed, become quieter. I neither searched for her nor avoided her. A part of me believed that when she was ready, she would come back, not to argue, not to reclaim, but simply to stand beside me, to look back on all we had lost, and what we finally found again, in silence. And me, every evening, as the sun dipped low, I would walk out to the apple orchard and stand where my father once stood. I'd look toward the far edge of the valley, where the fields now shimmered with rows of organic grain, and in the golden light of dusk, I could almost see them there, my father. My mother, their smiles dissolving gently into the color of the earth. I no longer saw myself as the keeper of their legacy. I was simply continuing the work they began, guided by one quiet truth. Every sincere seed will bloom, sooner or later. One morning at the end of March, when mist still hugged the ground, I placed a basket of apples in the back of my car and drove toward Evergreen Memorial Park. The road ran alongside the Marys River, flanked by rows of maple trees just beginning to bud. The sky was soft and overcast, like gray silk, enough to catch the faint reflection of memories I still carried in my heart. The air smelled of soil, grass, and magnolia scents that brought back the mornings my father would wake me to water the garden, and the afternoons my mother taught me to bake apple pies in our little kitchen. The cemetery was quiet, with only a few people placing flowers by the headstones. I walked slowly, holding the basket of apples, bright red, perfectly round, picked from the tree my mother planted 30 years ago, still blossoming as if winter had never touched it. I stopped before two stones set side by side. Robert Mitchell, 1953, 2023. And Elaine Mitchell, 1956, 2022. The granite was smooth, the names carved deep. I set the basket between them. One apple rolled out and came to rest exactly at the point where the two stones met, like their hands still finding each other, even in rest. I sat down, drew a long breath. There were no tears, only a calmness that felt like a river within me finally settling. "I understand now," I whispered, my voice raspy but steady. "You didn't leave me less. You left me more time, patience, and the way to see real worth." My hand brushed across their names, cold, rough, yet somehow warm beneath my touch. "Dad, Mom. I did it. The company's back, just the way you dreamed. The first organic seeds of spring are in the ground. People are beginning to believe again that Mitchell isn't just a brand, it's a promise." Though, a soft breeze drifted through, tilting the basket of apples ever so slightly. The scent of apples spread through the air, sweet and warm, like my mother's hand brushing my hair whenever I was tired. I looked up at the sky, where a thin beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, falling over the distant fields where the lavender I'd planted around the roots of Grace sign was now in full bloom. I smiled faintly. "Maybe you're both watching," I whispered. "And if you are, I hope you know I don't feel small anymore. I'm part of your legacy, not because I carry the Mitchell name, but because I've learned how to love, how to keep, and how to let go." I stood, brushed the dust from my pants, and turned to leave. As the wind rose again, a few lavender petals fluttered down into the apple basket, resting softly atop the gleaming red fruit. I glanced back and smiled. "I'll come back," I said quietly. "But next time, I'll bring my students. I want them to see where everything began." On the drive home, the car radio played an old song my father used to hum on long trips. "Take your time, it'll come around." I laughed, singing along softly, letting my voice blend with the wind as if I were talking to the two souls still watching, silently, with pride.